But when you're in the middle of shooting, it can be a real pain to go into the menu all the time and to have to constantly shift into the menu mode, find the thing you want to change, and then change it. So what's the other nice thing about the VPC-CG10 is that it actually gives you the opportunity to set so-called shortcuts. And that's where you get to use the little joystick here to set different controls. And I've set mine for all of my most frequently accessed controls. The downside is that it's pretty fiddly. I mean, it's a little tiny little joystick here. It's very easy to sort of actuate accidentally or to actuate wrong the way you didn't intend to. Nevertheless, it sure beats having to go into the menus. It makes it much more like a higher-end camera, which would have dedicated buttons for things like ISO or manual focus, etc. And so you can actually set this custom in your camera. You click menu, and now on the recording menu, you see the left-hand side here. We go down and we go to number 2 right here and click over and go to shortcuts. And so here you can see all of the directions up, down, left, and right of the joystick, and you can assign them to different values. So you can see up here that I have set my left joystick to exposure. And you can see there's a lot of different things you could do. You get the display off or on. Sequential is more for the photo, not video. Self-timer also for video. ISO, exposure compensation, flash for photo, not video. Focus or auto exposure lock or autofocus lock. Autofocus lock or auto exposure lock could be nice if you use auto exposure or autofocus a lot, because what you can tell it, okay, it looks good to me, now lock it, hold that setting in place. But I like it on exposure. Pushing down, I have it on focus. Pushing to the left, I have it on ISO. And pushing to the right, I have it on exposure compensation. Now we've got the camera centered on a little bit of a still life here of 8-track tapes. It's lit with just plain window light. It is very overcast. It's snowy outside today, but it gives us some nice diffuse pleasing light here. And we'll use this as an example to show how you can modify your controls on the fly. Now, when I say on the fly, one thing I have to note is that when you're actually recording video, you can't change any of the settings. So you do have to do it in between shots. So, but you know, if you're shooting film style like a lot of people do, mostly you're not going to change your exposure settings, etc. in the middle of a shot. So that's the one caveat here. On higher end video cameras, certainly you can change all of your basic exposure and focus settings on the fly. The VPC-CG10, you can only do it when you are not shooting. So we're not shooting right now. And see, we've got an ISO of 50, and it is set to aperture priority. That's my favorite setting for shooting. It's just simplest for me. It looks pretty good, but it looks like we could use a slightly higher ISO. So I have ISO, as I showed you before, programmed. So if I press the little joystick to the left, you see ISO lights up, and I can change it. And that's 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600. That looks a little high to me, so I'm going to go and just eyeballing it. 100 looks okay. You can see the things in the foreground are a little blown out, but things in the background look pretty well exposed. You don't have a ton of latitude, but it's decent enough. So then I may want to change my exposure. So let's change our aperture, and I press up on the joystick. And that's at f8. Half-second exposure in video, that's going to be a little tough to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and move it to the left and going to open up my aperture. Of course, it's going to get a little bit more blown out. We're going to go to 3.5. And the nice thing, of course, like with a camera like this, with a little tiny chip, is that really get pretty good depth of field no matter what aperture you choose. The only reason you're going to choose a smaller aperture is in order to control the light coming in order to control exposure. You're really not going to change your depth of field all that much. So here it looks a little blown out, and so I can actually go to exposure compensation on the right. You can see right now it's a 0, and I can actually reduce my exposure here. And what that's going to do is mostly just change the shutter speed for me. So I'm going to go down to -1.5 stops here. Finally, let's check out focus, which I have programmed to pressing downwards. And what that does, first of all, is it changes the mode. That's macro mode. And we have, that's actually autofocus, that little symbol, and manual focus. So right now we're at infinity focus, and it actually looks pretty good, even though things are not at 8 meters or more. In fact, everything here is only about 1.5 meters from the camera. It is difficult to judge manual focus on this camera because it does not blow up the screen. So you really just got to eyeball it and do your best. I usually, it's a combination of me guesstimating how far my subject is from me and looking at how sharp it seems on the screen. And I usually nail it most of the time. So much of the time I'm shooting things that are more than 8 meters away from me, in which case going all the way to infinity and locking it seems to work pretty well. If we're doing interview, probably someone be 1.5 to 2 meters. Again, the depth of field in these cameras is pretty deep, so your focus isn't nearly as critical as it would be on an SLR, even on a more prosumer camcorder. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to mark that as our focus, and then now I could start taking video. So you can see it does tell me what my focus is in my ISO. But if I press the joystick different directions, it doesn't do anything. So we're locked in. Although what I can do is I can zoom in if I like on Johnny Cash there, and you can see our focus has become more critical, and you can see there that my focus isn't quite on there. And I can zoom out, which you can't always do on some pocket cameras that do video, so that's kind of nice. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, and I'm going to do what's called a crash focus, which means I'm going to zoom in about as far as I'm going to zoom in here. And I'm going to adjust my focus now. So we're on manual focus. So it looks like it was about 1.70 meters is really my focus point. So I can zoom out now, and I can press record, and now I'll zoom in, and we'll see that my focus was about spot on there. And that's definitely the way to focus with a camera like this, is with that so-called crash focusing. Zoom all the way in, not digital zoom, just pure optical zoom, and focus and zoom out, and you should maintain that focus point that you picked. It's a nice little trick, works really well on this camera. And again, one of the advantages of the VPC-CG10 over a lot of flip cameras or the ones from Kodak is that you do actually have a true optical zoom. 5 times, it gets you in a heck of a lot closer than with a fixed focal length camera like a flip camera. And you don't have to use any digital zoom, so the quality does turn out a lot better. So that, in a nutshell, is how you use the manual exposure and focus controls on your Sanyo VPC-CG10. And I hope that that gives you some tips on how to get the most out of this great little camera that now is available for just a little bit over $100. I'm Paul Riismandel, and I'm the Media Geek. Thanks for watching.